Hi, my name is Lauren Gray, and on behalf of Edelman Equal and Edelman Equal New York, I'm thrilled to welcome my former boss and dear friend, Shannon Minter, for today's fireside chat with Lisa Ross. Shannon is one of the top nationally recognized transgender attorneys in the movement. He's a constitutional law expert and has been practicing law for more than 30 years. For more than 20 years, he's served as legal director at NCLR, or the National Center for Lesbian Rights, which was the first national LGBTQ legal organization founded by women and provides free legal services to the full LGBT community. Throughout his career, Shannon has argued and won a case before the US Supreme Court, which prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in school groups. He also led the landmark California marriage equality case that held that same-sex couples have a fundamental right to marry. And he filed the first lawsuit against President Trump's now rescinded transgender military ban. As a reminder, throughout the conversation, if you could please enter any questions into the Q&A box, that would be really helpful. And with that, I will turn things over to our amazing Lisa Ross for a conversation with Shannon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And before I do anything, Lauren, that was a beautiful introduction, and I think Shannon and I are both moved by it. And kudos and thanks to Edelman Equal and Edelman New York Equal for pulling us together. You all were not able to listen in the green room, but I said to Shannon that I was kind of intimidated by having our conversation because he is so amazing and remarkable, and the work that he has done is, I think, an example for all of us who fancy ourselves as activists or fancy ourselves as advocates. Because what Shannon has done is said, yes, the marching is important, the advocacy is important, but as we know at Edelman, everything has got to result in root changes, root causes, and addressing the root causes of discrimination and equity, lack of opportunity, etc. But it all has to end up in the courts. It has to end up on the Hill. It has to be a regulatory, judicial, or a legislative change in order for it to actually really stick. And so Shannon, kudos and thank you to you. And I said that was going to be my first question. It's going to be my second question. I didn't get a chance to ask you anything about you. We've established a love of pets and rescue, but tell us more about who you are, where you are from, what you are interested in, and how you got into this incredibly important line of work that we are all benefiting from.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Lisa. And I want to thank my former colleague, Lauren Gray. For the record, at no time was I Lauren Gray's boss. We worked together. And as I've said to her and everyone else, Lauren was the most brilliant communications person I have ever worked with, and I learned so much from her. And then when she went on to Edelman, I've been following Edelman, and you all are amazing. I mean, I'm delighted to be here, and this is so cool. And thank you, Edelman Equal and Edelman New York Equal. This is wonderful. Yeah, I was born in Texas. I'm like a transgender man, so I was born female, assigned female at birth, as they say. And I grew up in this like really conservative family in kind of a farming community in a really tiny little town in Texas. Like a lot of transgender people in my generation, I think, I did not know anything about I don't think I didn't even know the word transgender. So I just knew something was different, had a lot of struggles. I knew I was attracted to girls, and I thought, well, I think I must be a lesbian then. And so I lived I was raised as a girl. I had lesbian identity as a teenager. It was really rough. I had wonderful, loving parents and family, but they had no information about anything. And I felt very rejected by them. And it was, that's just crushing for kids. And I had an awful time in high school with being harassed. And, I had a girlfriend, and we got trapped on a dead end road by a bunch of boys from our high school that surrounded us with baseball bats, things like that, had tires slashed. It was a really scary, traumatizing experience. But I made it somehow and ended up going to law school and then going to work for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I learned enough about transgender issues to realize, oh my gosh, this is what I have never been able to figure out about myself. I came out, it was wonderful. All my life has been just so much better since then. I was able to get medical care. This was all in San Francisco. And the cool thing was, right when I came out, it was like the mid 90s. That's like right when the mainstream gay rights movement was deciding it was going to include transgender people. And I happened to be like at one of the national orgs and transitioned. And so I got to be part of all those discussions. And my whole career, I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. I just have been in the right place at the right time to get to do these amazing things. Like I was in California, and that ended up being like such a major state for the marriage equality movement. And I got to argue the California marriage case, and then do the challenge the transgender military ban and work on transgender youth issues. Like we represented Jazz Jennings when she was just like a little kid wanting to play soccer in Florida. So I've gotten to just work on the most amazing, fascinating, and important to real people issues that I could ever have dreamed of.
You also have, which is evidenced in just your introduction, but in everything that I've read about you, you and Lauren's Love Fest. You also just have a very, you have that unique combination of a big heart and a big mind. A big heart and a brilliant mind, and I think you need both when you are trying to change things, because you have to be open, you have to be receptive, you have to be forgiving, but not all the way. You have to give, but you have to give of yourself, and you've been so expert at that. When did you realize, however, that you could go this far with change, but you really had to, in order to bring about systemic change, that you had to go to court? Is that why you went to law school? Like, when did you sort of decide and say, hey, I can go this far, but I can take it to the nth degree if I am part of systemic change and policy change?
Boy, I had some incredible mentors. I just want to say on the heart piece of this, just a little note here, especially since you are communications firm. I would say if I had to say the number one thing I learned from advocacy or about advocacy over the years is that it is nothing but communication. I mean, honestly, you and I are in the same business in a lot of ways, and that we learned that so directly during the marriage cases when we started off being too lawyerly and talking all the time about, well, there's marriages, it brings like 300 federal rights and responsibilities. And then our messaging people, our communications people told us, stop talking like that. That's not how people talk about marriage. People don't get married to get legal rights. They get married for love and commitment. And so we really changed our briefs too. Like judges are also people. And we changed our briefs to have the focus be on love, commitment, equal dignity. And that it resonated with the courts just like it did with the people. So, we really are all kind of doing the same thing here. But yeah, you've got to me, like the single most fascinating kind of intellectually, I guess, professional part of doing this kind of lawyering is figuring out the pressure points. And then it is amazing the systemic change you can bring about by a single lawsuit or a single piece of legislation, even local legislation. Like my favorite example of this, Lisa, is San Francisco back in the late 90s. The San Francisco Board of Commissioners, like San Francisco local government, they passed the first equal benefits ordinance in the country. And it's so simple. They just said the city of San Francisco will not enter into contractual arrangements with any business that doesn't provide equal benefits. At the time, it was domestic partner benefits. Overnight, that quintupled the number of companies across the nation that provided those benefits. I mean, it's being involved in things like that is just so exciting. I mean, you see like something you've worked on and done, and then you just see these amplified effects. It's a really cool experience.
Yeah. I want to go back to, and it's related to my second question, which is how and why do you think that attitudes and issues facing the LGBTQ community have evolved during your career? So how and why, but you already kind of answered part of it, and it is comms. It's how we talk about it. So I'm really happy that you did a shout out and a nod to the work that we do, because I often say what we do is not brain surgery, but it can change and save lives. The way you communicate about something, you could have, and I hope we eventually do have a cure for cancer. I hope we have a cure for all those things that ail us, but unless you can talk about it, it's just sitting there. And unless you can communicate and get people to understand how to use this cure, it's for naught. So talk about the role of communications in helping to evolve changing attitudes and whatever else you think has contributed to the change in attitudes toward the community and issues over the years.
I love this. We are so on the same page here. We can be, 100% right in principle, but if we can't communicate that in ways that other people can hear, it doesn't matter how right we are. But yeah, I mean, the changes that have happened in my lifetime are literally stunning. I mean, but when I was first coming out and doing this work, you could still criminalize same-sex relationships. There were hardly any state protections. There was nothing relationship recognition. Like same-sex couples there was not a single state that had any type, never mind marriage, like any type of relationship recognition. Not till 2001. California was the first state. And they had a statewide domestic partnership registry, but then it took only 15 years from that first state law to the Supreme Court decision Obergefell, 15 years. I mean, that's how fast things can change. But yeah, what you said is completely true. Like the key to making that change has 100% been humanizing LGBTQ people. When we did that so successfully in the marriage equality litigation. And, that was the important thing about that. Yes, marriage is important, and we want same-sex couples who want to and choose to be able to marry, but the power of those cases in Obergefell was completely changing the way the country thinks about gay people. They used to think of them as sinful and, completely the opposite of family values. And now people totally recognize that same-sex couples have families and relationships just like anyone else. And even now, I mean, it used to be the thought of gay people marrying was just like completely unthinkable. And now when people hear the word marriage, I think they think about gay people. So it's just cool. But and I worked with Lauren on the transgender military ban litigation. And our goal was to take all those lessons we learned from marriage equality and apply them to the transgender military ban litigation and try to use it as a springboard to do that same thing, to just change the way people think about and see transgender people. I mean, because even though it was horrible when President Trump issued that ban, it was just devastating. But we recognize it was also an incredible opportunity, because before then, I'm sure like the vast majority of people in this country had no idea that transgender people even serve in the US military. Mm-hmm. And it gave us an opportunity to amplify the heck out of that message. We found the most amazing plaintiffs who were just like these outstanding people that anybody would admire. I mean, you just couldn't help but think, oh my gosh, this is like an incredible person here, like a trans guy that was in the Naval Academy. One of the military folks who was involved in like capturing Osama bin Laden later came out as a transgender person. I mean, it really allowed us to just show this wonderful side, to show transgender people in such a positive light, contributing to their country, being brave and courageous and dedicated and selfless. So that I think we're not quite there yet the way we are with same-sex couples, but and gay people more generally, where I think the public is so with us. I mean, latest polls showed something like upwards of 70% of people now support marriage equality, and that's across partisan lines. I mean, we're getting there with trans people. We're making so much progress very quickly. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah, we're not. You may be more positive than I am on this. I think we are so far away from where we need to be, and it frustrates me greatly. And so I have so many questions like swirling around in my head right now. But one of them, I'm going to give maybe you and Lauren a chance to talk about this together. I'd like to make an observation, and then I want to ask a question. My observation is that, particularly in terms of same sex, that I recall the time when Obama and Hillary Clinton were in office, neither of them were in favor, and they talked about it openly. And then I remember the very moment when Obama said, I'm looking at my children's parents, I'm looking at their classmates and their families, and we're a family. And when people see the commonality that exists, then they seem to breathe a little easier. They seem to breathe, they're happier, they're more comfortable. I personally sort of resent having to go to that nth degree for you to be comfortable with me because I'm different from you, but I accept that it's part of the process. But I think so many sort of, and the same thing with Biden, he talked about when I started to see it and I started to understand it. And I think that's what's happened in this community too. We started to see people and our comfort level increase. So that's my observation. My question is as a strategist. So you all successfully argued cases. You have changed the course of history by, again, advancing legislative and judicial changes. What are like the 4 things that you know are necessary in a campaign like that to be successful? We talked about the role of communications, but as practitioners, advise us on these are because you've had a lot of these wins. What has been consistent in all of those wins that you know are necessary to advance a campaign? And Lauren, I would love for you to opine as well.
Okay, Lauren, you're gonna have to help me here. But one of them definitely, well, and I will have to give Evan Wilson credit for this. I'm sure people know who he is. He was like very involved in advocating for marriage equality. You have to know what constitutes winning. Like you have to have a clear goal in mind, so you can drive towards it. The comms part is absolutely.
I'm taking notes, by the way. I'm literally taking notes.
Yeah. I mean, the communications is, that is just so essential to, and it's got to be like, Lawrence, the kind of stuff we would do when we had our cases and all that, we would have like literally like kind of a template, like this is our messaging framework for cases. And in the military ban litigation, for example, it was like we're appealing to shared values. We are talking about how this ban is harmful to the country. We did talk, we did talk also about how it harmed individual transgender service members, but we put the primary emphasis on this is bad for our country because people are people. Human nature is what it is. And yes, can we feel compassionate and concerned about other people being harmed? Yes, but people also, all of us think about ourselves. And so if you can tie it back to people and be like, this is bad for you. This is bad for the country you care about and live in. It's really important. I mean, we did that with marriage too, that it's good. Marriage provides stability. These couples can contribute to their communities. This is good for their children. It's good for everybody's children. So the more you can, appeal to the universal benefit or impact of what you're going for. And then, for me, I mean, given that we're talking about litigation, you do have to have real carefully selected plaintiffs. You have to make sure, and this is not, I've heard the criticism that, you just, you're excluding people who aren't perfect or model fill in the blank. That's really not what we do. I mean, Lauren, you were on the inside loop on this, and you know this yourself. That's not the idea here. We're not trying to exclude people who are have a complex situation or who are part of marginalized groups in the community at all. It's more that you want to pick people who illustrate the harms that you're asking the court to correct. So there has to be that kind of a fit. And then of course, having a good team and a plan about how all the pieces are going to work together, like how the lawyers work with the comms people and how you work, with other groups who are working on the same issue. There's a lot of coordination involved. I mean, Lauren, you've been on many a conference call. Lauren, help me. What would you add?
That was pretty comprehensive, but Lauren, yeah, bring it.
So from a comms perspective, the four things, I think the first would be storytelling. As Shannon mentioned, you have to really humanize the issues that are happening. It was so important for us to introduce people to the plaintiffs, for them to hear their stories. And it's very difficult to do media interviews if you're a plaintiff, because you have to be highly trained so that you don't contradict any of the facts as laid out in legal filings. So we had to work very closely with them to make sure that they remembered every factual detail that would have been explained as part of what Shannon was filing with the courts. And we also had to recognize that they're people and that it was emotionally difficult sometimes to do some of these media interviews. So we had to take cues for that. We flew some plaintiffs to New York City to film with Teen Vogue, to do a video with Teen Vogue in the Condé Nast building. And coming out of there, someone used an anti-LGBTQ slur against one of the plaintiffs when they saw him on the street. So
walking out, like physically the person was walking out and somebody said something?
Walking out in the financial district, it's in the Freedom Tower, walking out in the financial district to get a slice of pizza. So just recognizing the emotional toll that some of this can take on people, to share their stories and see the comments that come in, online when they're published in USA Today, or, walking down the street and hearing things. So really trying to stay attuned to some of that as part of storytelling. The other thing I'll say as well is that the LGBTQ movement is fantastically coordinated. We met weekly with GLAAD, Lambda, the ACLU, Freedom for All Americans, Trevor. We all get on a call every week, and there's a tremendous amount of deference for which organization is leading certain work, and we let those entities define how everyone talks about certain issues. And the reason is that we don't want to contradict any legal filings. We don't want to diminish or hurt any of the advocacy work that certain organizations are doing. So I think a lot of the LGBTQ movement's strength is just how incredibly highly coordinated they are and how much respect they have for each other. The other thing I think that's really important is message research. We have organizations that do a tremendous amount of message research to make sure that we have an understanding of, do people know what the terms that LGBTQ people are using mean? I think we've talked about this before, Edelman Equal has, but a lot of times advocacy orgs prefer using LGBTQ because as we continue to add letters or LGBTQ plus, people get confused and then they resent the community. We see a lot of backlash toward the community. So a lot of very careful decisions from people who are working on these issues to try to make sure that we're pushing them along the best that we can. And then the last thing I would say is just making sure that we're using really human messaging, the way that Shannon talked about, being really conscious that legal terminology is really not intuitive for a lot of people. So, we really want to explain, and Shannon is absolutely fantastic at this, especially with members of the media. We really want to explain very clearly what's happening in a way that people understand, even if they've not been to law school. So it's really a really critical part of advancing some of that work forward.
So that's kind of a surgical autopsy of like what works, like, storytelling, messaging, tight strategy, understanding of everybody's role here. I love, Shannon, when you started, clarity on what the win is. Like, what is it actually, like, what does the win actually mean? You didn't talk a lot about how you brought in allies and advocates and how you had stakeholders to engage and to help you with your messaging, because I always think about intersectionality. I recall last year when we were celebrating and recognizing Pride Month, it was right after the murder of George Floyd. And at Edelman, that team stepped back and said, you know what, we're going to focus differently. We're going to talk about the intersectionality of what's happening in the African-American community and what's happening in this community. And I've always thought that that was a generous and smart thing that the community does. And there is a question in here. The other thing that has struck me too, when you talk about language, people take that lightly, but you leave off a letter, you leave off something, somebody no longer feels like they're being spoken to, then you're not talking to me and you're leaving me out yet again. So the importance of language, but talk to me a little bit about how you developed allies and how you brought them in as part of this strategy, or whether you did.
We did. Yeah, no, Lisa, I love that question. Yes. For example, I know I'm talking a lot about the transgender military ban litigation, but it's still very fresh on my mind.
Yeah.
In that case, we first and foremost brought in every single former secretary from the Navy, Air Force, Army, etc., which was remarkable to get them to. I mean, it was incredible to get support from them, and the very fact that the people of that stature, who do not lightly involve themselves in litigation, were willing to come forward, which is a powerful. I think in some ways that was the key to winning the cases, because believe me, that's one way to get the attention of courts. I mean, we have that, so we did that, but like we also wanted to put this ban in the context of the military's history of discriminating against people of color, Black people particularly, and women. So we pulled in, the leading experts and advocates on those issues, on the history of race discrimination and sex discrimination in the military as well, and got them to be part of our press efforts. And they filed amicus briefs to contextualize the trans ban in the context of this history. I mean, I think that was also completely critical to our success. And of course, many of our plaintiffs were also people of color, and we tried to, and women, so we tried to make sure that when we're talking about who's serving in the military and the disparate impact of the transgender military ban on transgender people of color, that was, part of our messaging. And yeah, you're just so right about the language. Like in doing all of that, you have to make sure you're including people, that you're talking about the full range of issues, which are always going to be intersectional because life is intersectional. Do it in a way that doesn't turn people off, that you don't lose people who are not already with you, and that, I mean, that's my number one struggle, is how do we do that and bring people with us? There's some famous Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote, which I'm going to mess up now because I didn't think of it ahead of time, but she said something to the effect of like fight like heck for what you believe in, but do it in a way that brings people with you, along with you.
Right. I think for we talked so much in recent times about the concept of belonging. And you feeling that this is your place and you can walk into a room with confidence and so forth. But part of that, if you are a quote unquote other, the language matters because, you feel left out very, very easily. And I think strategically, anytime you can bring more people in, it just feels better. Let's shift and talk about what's next. There's been a lot of conversation and obviously a lot of attention, and many people are saying that the transgender community is under specific attack right now. And we read and we hear about it all the time. And then there's a lot of just venom. I can't think of another word, a lot of ignorance and venom that is directed toward the youth in the transgender community. What's the plan? Like, what are we doing to protect? What are we doing to advance? What are we doing to make sure that the youth in the community know that they belong and that they have a path forward?
Oh, isn't it horrible what's happening right now? So horrible.
You have to look away. You honestly you just have to look, and that's dangerous. So let me catch myself right now, because you have to look away to save your soul, but then you got to look back to make sure that you stay with it, because too many people look away because it's too painful and then you forget about it. So you can look away to kind of protect yourself, but you got to look back to keep it going.
You do. And when we get briefs sometimes from the other side in some of these cases about transgender kids, it's honestly you got to just like steel yourself to read the brief. And you just know ahead of time, this is going to really be painful. Sometimes I'll put it off, and I'll be like, got to read this brief, but it is really hard. But you're right. We can't keep looking away. Well, I mean, what's going on is that our opponents know that it won't really work anymore for them to directly attack lesbian, gay, bisexual people, but because there's just too much public support at this
Yeah.
point. But they're very well aware that, as you pointed out earlier, we're not there yet on trans people. There's still so much ignorance and fear, so many just misinformation that people have. It's the easiest thing in the world, honestly, to get people stirred up about transgender people by just playing on stereotypes and fears. And that's what they're doing. The hard part to wrap your mind around is that they're going after children. I mean, that is so shocking. But I think the reason they're doing that, I think, is because honestly, for a lot of people in this country, I think the idea that there's such a thing as a transgender child is a shock. And when the other side is, uses that, it's like, these kids are too young. How can a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old possibly know who they are? And they're being pressured by these, out of control advocates. And I mean, they paint this whole picture that it's been, unfortunately, it's got a lot of traction. We've seen more than 300 bills this year alone targeting transgender, mostly kids. Most of the bills are about kids. And 8 states now, in their sports is the number one area they're focusing. So we've got 8 states now that have passed laws completely banning transgender children from playing school-based sports, everything from PE to team sport. It's really incredible. So we're the movement is full out, and like Lauren said, it is a very coordinated movement. I appreciate that every day. And you can believe that everyone is 100% focused like a laser on this, and mobilizing our allies, bringing in lawsuits, talking to legislators, all the things that we have to do to do what we have always done before. And I just have to hope and believe we're going to succeed this time as well. That every time we get attacked like this, it's a trauma, it's a blow, and it is an opportunity to educate people, on something they didn't know about before. So if we, now they have put trans kids front and center in the whole public square, and we've got to rise to the occasion and educate the heck out of our whole country as quickly as we can.
With you and support from people like Lauren involved, it gives people like me some solace that this will too be addressed, and that we will be talking about it less in the next few years. Shannon, that what we do, we've already talked about the clear alliances in what you all do and how we do it. And at Edelman, we firmly believe in the intersection of like social issues and the business community, and all of our research, which I hope you've seen some of, talks very clearly about the role and the expectation of business to take on social issues. If you look at this as a social issue, what are the 3 or 4 things, you can see I'm into quantifying, what are the 3 or 4 things that you think the business community should be doing that it's not, to advance the cause and to ensure that people are protected and have equal opportunity and access?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough how important the voice of the business community is. It is probably, for better or for worse, the most important voice politically in our nation. That's just how it works. And I will say that the business community has been an incredible ally to transgender people. I mean, they were an incredible ally around to same-sex couples and their families, around the marriage equality movement. I mean, it could not have shown up more strongly or vocally or visibly. And we're seeing that happen as well with transgender people. Like when North Carolina a few years ago passed a law trying to say transgender people can't use the right bathroom, HB2, the business community was right there. And I mean, big businesses, IBM, American Airlines, Intel, sorry, Nike, Salesforce. I mean, they just stepped up and helped us, shine a spotlight on that shameful law in North Carolina. And honestly, it scared the heck out of other states, and it was a major deterrent. So now we've got these attacks on transgender young people, And that's new. It's a new issue. I'm sure a lot of businesses are like, oh gosh, we don't know anything about this. So that's where, I mean, you all could be very helpful with all the, I know you're in contact with so many of them, to just get them comfortable and remind them, hey, you've done this before and you can do it again. And we need them. And they're definitely stepping up. Like we've had what we see now is they're stepping up more behind the scenes so far. Like when the Arkansas governor vetoed a sports ban in Arkansas, now sadly, and a medical ban.
Yeah.
Now sadly, the legislature overrode his veto. But the fact that a Republican governor in Arkansas would do that meant a lot. That meant a lot. And it is 100% behind the scenes pressure from the business community that compelled him to do that. And I mean, and he saw it was the right thing to do too, but it gave him the courage and the motivation to do it. So yeah, I mean, we need businesses to do what they've done before, which is, just donating to groups working on these issues. And it's great to if they actually do research and find out who's really doing the work and try to direct the, funding that way. I mean, that makes a huge, big difference. And just using their own voices to speak out and condemn these laws. That makes huge. I mean, that is probably the single most powerful thing that they can do.
Yeah.
And then the partnerships, the working with groups or movements to do like education campaigns. I mean, just wonder. I mean that, and bringing pulling you all in, putting together these like powerful, sophisticated, moving, emotional campaigns that, both get the business brand out there and show that they're, standing up for all the right things. And also they're reaching, millions and millions of people with these very positive, humanizing messages. I mean, I'm hoping that's what we'll see happen. I mean, this hit all of us by surprise. So I think everyone's just, taking a moment to gather and regroup. But I'm really hoping that we're going to see the business community, come forward full force as they have done so many times in the past.
I think one of the things that I co-sign everything that you said, and one of the things that we're seeing in our interaction with the business community and encouraging them to always go further. So it's one thing to say something, but then it's like, what are you doing? So you can say how you feel, but then you can sign onto an amicus brief and make all the difference in the world. You can say something, but then you can look at what you're doing within your own organization. So we talked about what they can do and are doing well without naming any names. Where or have you been disappointed in the lack of support or silence from industry as it comes to some of these issues? Like, what are they doing wrong?
I don't know if I would say I'm disappointed only because this just happened. But I mean,
but the issues writ large, not the issues writ large.
Yeah. No, I get you. I get you. Yeah, I will just say we definitely need business to be more vocal around supporting transgender young people than they have been. And I think they want to be. That's my impression. I think that the hesitation maybe, or the reason we haven't seen as strong a response as we need, is I think they just don't quite yet know how to engage with this issue because it is unfamiliar and it's very charged. It's like we were saying, most people are unaware there's even such a thing as a transgender child. So there's a steep learning curve here, but it's not that hard, honestly. Once you talk to the advocates in this area, you talk to young people and families. I mean, we had the wonderful young woman, teenage girl, Stella, who testified before Congress in support of the Equality Act recently. I thought she was incredible.
Me too.
Yeah, she just was so sweet and talked about bowling with her friends and her excitement about going to college. And I mean, this is not, as you said earlier, it's not really rocket science.
Right.
And I think this is like such a wonderful opportunity to highlight some of these kids. That's another thing though too, like precisely because there's all these hostile laws out there now, or bills and laws, it can be hard for these kids to be public and come forward.
Right.
So, there's some specific complexities and challenges here, but nothing that could not be overcome.
Yeah, yeah. I have, my head again is every time you say something, I'd spin and I want to ask like 10 more things, but why don't we give our guest an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have or share any observations. And Lauren, for that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, great, thank you. So the first question is from Adam Brico, and he's asking about trans athletes. So what do you think is the strongest message in support of transgender athletes in the fight for their rights?
Yeah, wonderful question. I'm not sure what the strongest one is. I'd love for y'all to do some messaging research to help us figure that out. But one message that I think does resonate is just that this is transgender athletes, and transgender women in particular have been playing school sports, women been playing school sports for decades,
Right.
No problems. I mean, there was a wonderful AP story that came out just a few weeks ago where this AP reporter went around and interviewed all these state legislators who were sponsoring these dreadful, hateful sports bans, and asked every single one of them, well, can you show me, is there a problem with this in your state? Are there trans girls who are proving to be a problem when they're playing school sports? Not one single one of them could point to a single instance, a single problem. And that story, I think, really helped us. And that, I think, is a very powerful message. I mean, there's states like California, which, the biggest school districts in the whole country, Los Angeles and San Francisco, I mean, LA is obviously a lot bigger. They've had like non-discrimination policies letting trans kids play on the right team based on their gender identity for literally more than 20 years. And you know how many kids that is, like, over time in that period? No problem right. At all. So this is truly like it's very much like the bathroom issue.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll remember when all these bills a few years ago saying, trying to make people be afraid that you have to share a bathroom with a transgender person, they're going to attack you. Just ridiculous stereotypes. And that worked for a short while, but very quickly people were like, wait a minute, this is just not real. You're just making these things up. So I am hopeful that we're in that same process with the trans sports issue, because there is no there to it. I mean, absolutely no foundation to any of the fear-based, sort of hate mongering that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So Tara Hagan said that she really liked your insight about don't talk about same-sex marriage in legal terms. And she asked, are there other topics in the LGBTQ space where comms could be improved to talk more like real people do? Spaces where we're still using really cold or rational jargon that isn't compelling.
Oh my gosh, yes, 1,000 times yes. And it's honestly in the very topic we're talking about right now with trans kids and the sports issue. Like, we have got to do better, the advocates in this area. I mean, I'm pointing the finger back on myself to not fall into this language of, well, this is violating their rights. I mean, yes, it is violating their rights, but that's not appealing to shared values. That's not humanizing these kids. I mean, we need to be saying things more like, these are children, they just want to play. It's cruel to exclude them from the social opportunities that other kids have. That kind of language. I'll just go a teeny little bit out on a limb here. It's maybe a little controversial, but I think we need to watch our language to make sure we don't use jargon that some people just don't recognize. And Lisa, I'm really keenly aware when I'm saying this, that I agree with you. We have to make sure that people feel seen and heard and included. But just for example, I personally try to avoid the word cisgender, which is a word that some, people use to describe people who are not transgender. And it's convenient, it's handy as heck to have that word, but most people don't know what that is. And it kind of sounds, it's just this, what is that word? So, I mean, I don't want people to get distracted by us using language in terms that they don't know what we're talking about. But there's a balance there because you also need to educate people along the way.
Lauren, before you go to the next question, I can't find my applause button on that, but I want to applaud that. I think we also have to be really careful about our elitism when we talk about these and other issues. And we can be so coastal in our thinking without looking at the rest of the country and using language. And then when people hear that language, they're afraid to ask a question because they're afraid they're going to look like they're ignorant or they're being homophobic if they're asking a question. And so they're afraid. And then as soon as they're afraid, they shut down and they don't participate in the conversation. They're just like, okay, I'm just going to go to something else. And so I do think, we talked about it earlier, the importance of language and also realizing that like not everybody knows everything and giving people some grace when they now, racism is racism, sexism is sexism, being homophobic is being homophobic, but there's also some gray area where it's just like, I just don't know, and don't make me feel like an idiot because I don't know. Because then you lose me and I shut down.
I agree with you so much. And, you know, that requires us to have moral intelligence, like you said, to be able to differentiate and discern, yeah, racism is racism, sexism is sexism, etc. And we've got to be clear about that and gently but firmly, usually, don't always have to be gentle, but usually gently but firmly confront that. But there is a huge terrain where exactly what you're saying, people, they mean well, they want to do the right thing, they want to understand, they just don't automatically have a full and complete understanding of everything there is to know.
Yeah.
In this case about transgender kids, for example. And we've got to just be patient and cut people slack and give them the grace to learn when they want to, because otherwise we're going to scare people away. And, you know, this is a thing that seems to happen with transgender advocacy in particular, that rather than doing all the stuff we know works, appealing to shared values, humanizing, telling stories, all the things, Lauren, you said, people have this tendency to want to launch off into a kind of philosophical lecture about the meaning of sex and gender and the gender binary. And, you know, there's a place for that, but it's not in like comms really, you know,
Yeah.
it's just not effective and it's not necessary. You don't have to subscribe to a particular philosophical view about sex or gender to realize that trans kids deserve to be supported and treated like other kids.
As I'm listening to the kindness and the patience in your voice, I am reminded of the other side of my personality, which is much more frustrated, much more angry, and is less forgiving, because in some cases I'm like, well, why don't you know? Like, you know, so if you don't know something, you should learn it. And so ignorance only goes but so far, because no one has to be ignorant on these issues. Learn, teach yourself, expose yourself. So it's two sides to it. All right, Lauren, what else?
So Shannon, we have a question from Chris Chompy about the composition of the Supreme Court. And he asked if you were arguing the case that you'd argued previously before the Supreme Court today, how do you think that would influence the way that you argued it or the outcome?
Great question.
I'd run away and catch a bus somewhere else. I'm so glad that that case was decided when it was, before the current justices composition of the court was as it is. That said, the Bostock decision, where this very court, well, they didn't have Amy Coney Barrett yet, but besides her, you know, a very conservative court, absolutely did the right thing by LGBT people and held that our nation's federal sex discrimination law prohibits sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. It was a beautiful decision, could not have been clearer or better. So that actually taught me a lesson, because I'll just be honest, I was pretty down and kind of depressed about the composition of the court and worried that it was almost kind of hopeless going forward. But that decision really taught me a big lesson. Like, we cannot give up. You cannot give up on anybody. even we can find ways to reach even these conservative justices. So good question. I do think we'd argue it very differently. I mean, we knew Justice Kennedy was the swing vote. Oh, the briefing was geared towards him. He really believes in fundamental rights and autonomy and dignity. Dignity was his, like, the theme of a lot of his decisions. So boy, our briefing was all about that. And that would go nowhere with the current court. There's none of them on the current, none of the current justices would that be like the most powerful presentation. So we'd probably have a much more dispassionate, sort of almost clinical, like analytical analysis of why the marriage bans or why laws restricting marriage to opposite sex couples or different sex couples discriminated against same-sex couples. In fact, it would be, if we were arguing it after Bostock, I would just be like, this is sex discrimination, just like Justice Gorsuch and Bostock. So
Yeah.
That's the fun of my job, honestly, is trying to figure out which arguments to present to which courts and justices, how to focus on the ones that are going to resonate most with whoever your audience is.
That's great. Thank you. And Shannon, what if you don't live in an area of the country where there's anti-trans legislation at issue? What are things that people can do to help out and help advocate, even if they don't live in those areas?
Well, it's really helpful for those states to, and localities even, to have good policies on the books. Not all of them do, so by any means. So we have a long, long way to go on that score in the so-called blue states. There's like California is still the only state in the whole country that actually has a statute, a law that says that kids K through 12 have to be permitted to play sports based on their gender identity. So getting, it always helps. I mean, the role of the, whatever vocabulary we want to use here, blue states, more progressive states, more LGBT friendly states, but the more they can sort of reasonably push the envelope in a positive direction, it changes the spectrum, it changes the underlying context, and helps pull the slower to come along with us states, helps pull them along. So, and then obviously things like, support, donating and supporting to groups who are operating in those states. That's helpful. That's helpful too. And helping to elect people at the federal level who are supportive, whatever the party, who are supportive of LGBTQ plus equality and dignity and freedom.
That's great. And Meg Martin asked about putting pronouns in professional signatures. So she noted that more and more employees at Edelman and beyond are starting to put their pronouns in email signatures on LinkedIn and on social media profiles. How important do you think this is for the community?
Yeah, that's a really kind of neat, honestly, pretty easy thing that people can do. I think it's good. I think it's helpful and supportive, and it means a lot to trans and non-binary people. To it's like you can just breathe a sigh of relief that you're in a friendly, at least somewhat understanding and supportive space. So I think that's wonderful, and it's really delightful how quickly that kind of professional norm has changed, and people just kind of do it more and more. Do it now as a matter of course. I think it's really terrific.
My takeaway from that is that it is a way for us to signal welcomeness. So regardless of what it actually, like the interpretation of it, but when you come into our organization, if you see more and more people doing that it's a sign of welcomeness. Yes. Yeah, and openness. Okay.
Thank you. That's the perfect way to put it.
And a question from Taylor Heath. So she asked, who are your favorite scholars, celebrities, or activists in the LGBTQ space who are doing great work that folks should follow?
Oh, that's so hard. Oh my gosh. That is a hard question. The easiest one for me to answer is my favorite scholars. and there's a wonderful law professor named Katie Iyer, Eyer, who I just love. She's so smart. And she tweets, and I love that because she does these very sophisticated analyses of Supreme Court decisions and important issues. But she's all the things we talk about. She's such a great communicator. She manages to boil it down in tweets that anybody almost probably could understand. So I love Katie Iyer. I love my friend Cliff Roskey, Rosky. He's got a lot of kids, so he doesn't always tweet as much, but he's amazing, and he's helped us so much on thinking through issues around conversion therapy. I realize I didn't even talk about that, but we have a whole campaign called Born Perfect to end conversion therapy, which is efforts by therapists and sometimes religious leaders to try to make a kid not be gay or transgender. It's horrible. It's so damaging, and unfortunately, it's very prevalent still. But Professor Roskey, and he's also on the board of Equality Utah. Oh, and I love Equality Utah and their executive director, Troy Williamson. They are just like, they're doing everything we're talking about humanizing, telling stories, meeting people where they are. And they've made Utah one of the most conservative states in the country, one of the most LGBT friendly states in the country. They are my heroes and role models. I'll tell you what, as Lauren knows, I'm horrible on like celebrities and all that. I'm like the worst person to ask about that, but you should follow my colleague, Matthew Shirka, who runs our Born Perfect program. And he knows, he's great on all that. And he's an amazing visionary leader himself. So thank you. That was a nice question to ask. Thank you for asking that.
Well, I will jump in and say that Shannon is also a national expert on conversion therapy and consulted on the recent film Boy Erased with Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe. So he was a part of giving some advice and offering some counsel on how to portray that in an accurate way.
Oh, Lauren, there's a new documentary called Pray Away coming out on Netflix that we also consulted on, and it's remarkable. I hope everyone can check that one out too.
Nice. Well, is there anything else, Shannon, that you want to be sure to share before we end?
I've had so much fun talking with you all. Lisa, it's wonderful to meet you. This has been just completely delightful. No, just besides the obvious, like y'all are talking to all these important businesses and government officials and candidates and agencies, and NGOs, and the more anything you all can do to encourage them and prod them to step up and be more supportive around trans people and trans kids in particular would just be wonderful.
Well, we can do that, and everybody on this call can take that back. But let me end by saying that we can do more, and we'd be happy to talk to you about a pro bono relationship to help you with that messaging and to help you with that communications counsel. So we want to do our part too and bring our resources to bear, and I think we can be helpful. And so I'm making the offer official.
Oh my God, Lisa, you just brought tears in my eyes. Thank you. That
You're
would
welcome.
be incredible. Oh my gosh, that would be a dream come true.
I'll work with Lauren, and Ann Clark is our citizenship person, and we'll put a team together, but we're in.
Thank you.
Okay, you're making me emotional because you're emotional. You guys, we are at time. Again, Edelman Equal and Edelman Equal New York, thank you for bringing this opportunity to us. Shannon, well, now we're going to be like together, so it's not like we're not going to see you again, but grateful for everything that you have done and that you will continue to do. And Lauren, I don't know you, but obviously I need to get to know you a little better because you are all that. You guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your feedback. And I think we've got some work in front of us, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
It's been so great. Thanks to everyone who tuned into this. I really appreciate it.
Take care. See you guys.
Bye,
Bye, Shannon. I'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.